starting with Martha's work here. First, her assignment 3, and I noticed that she didn't use the template, which made it a bigger job, but here I think that this will do. Looking at tints and shades, things look fine. With tones, there's a little jump after the first colored star at the top. And while value is fairly constant, it's not precisely constant. I did a grayscale test on it. Now, I'm taking a look at what I believe is part 2 of assignment 4, which is quite nice. We've got gradation of value, and there is a sense of gradation, a slow change. I noticed that you used the stroke and you changed it to red. I would say we're probably better off just leaving strokes out until we get to the final project. Here is Galley's work, and assignment 3 looks pretty good. Boy, you really do pass the grayscale test with your tone scales. On to assignment 4. Part 1 looks good. I can see you can find fully saturated colors. I would say, design for what the eye sees. It might be that the color picker can readily tell between those two blues, that they have different RGB values, but to my eye, it's a little harder to see that, and the same goes for the reds at the opposite end. Part 2 looks great. Part 3 is a lovely design. I don't see value that's perfectly constant, but this is pretty close. Here's Nicole's work, and first the scales. Now, one thing I have just a little concern over is I think I detect a bit of a tone in your tints. Now, where you begin with fully saturated colors at left, there shouldn't be any tone in a tints or a shade scale, and I think I pointed that out before. We do have a little fluctuation in value in tones for my grayscale test for you here, but on the whole, Nicole, you have the idea, and this looks good. Wow, look at that gradation of hue. That is sensational. I'm pressing everyone to omit strokes with Illustrator files until we get to the final project, please. Your gradation of value seems good, and with gradation of saturation, they were asking for constant value, and at first I didn't think you have that, but when I look at my grayscale test here, I think, wow, really it is pretty close. I'm not so sure about using those gradients for backdrops. We'll see how that goes for future. Now, Carmela's work. Okay, assignment 3. Well, this looks a little funny in Photoshop, and there is a documented fault in Photoshop. Blues sometimes look like purples, so there, in terms of hue being constant, you are okay. Now, a couple of things. I would say both at the end of tints and tones, you do a bit of a jump from square 9 to square 10. So there's an area or a couple of areas where transition could be more smooth. Now on to assignment 4. Part 1 looks beautiful. What a nice idea. Now I mentioned to a classmate of yours that you have to be careful that your interval is such that the eye can see it. The color picker may detect it and the eye still can't see. So I'd say some of your greens in part 1 are a little close. Part 2 looks great, and part 3 is so close. Like the tone scale in assignment 3, we wanted to have constant value, but you certainly do have the idea of a gradation in saturation. Next is Crystal's work, and let's see, assignment 3 looks pretty good. I'm checking tones in my grayscale test, and I do see some variation, but on the whole, you've got the idea. I would say between squares 9 and 10 in tints, you have a bit of a jump. Otherwise, things look good there. Now, boy, you can get those fully saturated colors down right with part 1 of assignment 4. I'd say let's leave stroke out because oftentimes it's interfering with color against color. Why? And you did that in parts 2 and 3 here. Part 2 is accurate, and part 3 is very close. I'd say per the grayscale test, we do have a little variation in value there, and it might be that some of those purple ovals are similar in hue. Their RGB values are too similar for the eye to detect a difference. I would encourage you to be more ambitious with your designs and also work at making perfect circles. And here is Carol's work. You know, Carol, I urge you to study the drafts discussion, and I'm trying to post at least a few reviews on the early side, and that depends on you guys posting your drafts early too. But I want you to check what I'm saying to your classmates so you're on the right track, because there's some info about assignment 3 that shows how you can use the same field within the color picker to make sure that you have constant hue. In your tint scale, for instance, the hue is varying. I can see that largely you have the right idea for all of these. Tones could be a little more constant in value, but the main trouble in assignment 3 is that tints are varying in hue. Now, on the other hand, assignment for part 1 looks quite right. I checked almost all of those circles, and the hues are quite saturated, which is something we were looking for. Now, but parts 2 and 3, I'm having difficulty telling which is which. You know, actually, both of those would meet the criteria for part 2. Interestingly, gradation of saturation is also like a tint scale or shade scale. The only thing that's making it like a tone scale is the requirement that value must be constant. Looking at Michelle's work now, and you know, I put 2 versions of her scales in here, and I think we can see a lot of improvement in the second bottom version. There are little inconsistencies. For instance, in shades, I think we see things get a little lighter toward the middle. However, this shows me that you understand the concept and that you're growing in your skills with using the software. Looking at Greg's work here, boy, yellow is a hard color with which to make those tint, shade, and tone scales. But you've done a pretty good job. I remember that you're asked to make the last square in tints white. Other than that, the tints look great. Shades look okay too. With tones, we are going for a constant value, which means that your gray should be a lot more pale. Your gray on the right end. Part 1 of assignment 4 looks perfect. Very nice. I checked your saturation. Part 2 looks alright as well. With part 3, there was the stipulation that value should be constant, and it's not as constant as it could be. And here, Catherine's work. Catherine, your assignment 3 looks very good. I must say I'm partial to the color that you chose. It's one of my favorites. Assignment for part 1 looks good. If you go to the discussion and look in drafts, you'll see I give instructions for getting fully saturated colors. Your colors are close, but they could be even more saturated. I really like this design for part 2, and that does meet the criteria. And part 3 is on the right track, but value is not constant. For part 3, we need something that looks like the tone scale in assignment 3. Now, your assignment 4 works are fuzzy, and I want you to take a look in the drafts discussion. I posted some material on resolution. I believe it's also in questions for the professor. Okay, Israel, I see you didn't use the template for assignment 3. That's not such a big deal, but you do have tints and shades mixed up. Just switch those terms and you're okay. Now, on to assignment 4. You know, this is quite accurate. I would like to see each part in a separate file in future, and omitting strokes would be a good idea too. Here's Jacindia's work. Looking at assignment 3, you know, you're meant to use the same 3 colors with all scales, so there's a little problem. Let's see. Tints and shades look pretty good. In tones, the interval is a little uneven, and you're meant to keep value constant. Now, on to assignment 4. Well, that's looking quite good. In part 1, you have the right idea, but go back to the discussion, look in drafts, and see my directions for finding saturated colors. Part 2 is fine, and you know, I wasn't sure you had it with part 3, but when I look at the grayscale test, it's perfect. I would omit strokes in future.